in those days, I couldn't duplicate a track. Um, so I just, malted a track, which is the analog version of duplicating, and EQ'd off the top of one of the tracks and EQ'd off the bottom of the other track. And then I had one fader that was low frequency and one fader that was mids and highs. And then I realized that I could compress and do finer equalization of each one of those things and then combine them at different levels. So that if I wanted a little more high, I could boost that. If I wanted a little, punch, I could boost the mid-high one. If I wanted a little more boof and lows, I boost the low one. So that's kind of how that started. And then, throughout my career, I modified it for the different technology moments in history. And now today, I still some in analog, but I don't use a console. I have a Neve sidecar, and then I use a Chandler mixer. So I wouldn't necessarily duplicate the track and go out a different output, but I would duplicate the track and split them into different bands of equalization, and I'll do it with anything. With anything, I have to. If I'm having issues, I'll do it with bass. I'll do it with. There are times that, I'll take a guitar signal and I'll EQ out all the bottom, but first I'll squash it, and then after the compressor I'll EQ out all the bottom. So it's just this sort of all you hear is the higher, the higher frequencies in the guitar, and I'll blend that. I'll throw that into a reverb, and I'll blend that in with the full-on round guitar, the non-filtered guitar, and so that when he hits, you can hear the splay of the the higher frequencies banging into a spring reverb. Whereas if I had sent the low frequencies there, it would have made the spring reverb go instead of right. So that's one simple and easy technique to do something like that with. I don't know. Does that help?
That helps.
I can't. Oh, okay, good.
Just quickly, so when you say analog multing, do you mean you're routing the signal to buses and affecting those, or when you said you couldn't duplicate the track?
Well, I'm working in Pro Tools, so I can duplicate the track as many times as I want. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. Okay. A little bit more about compression, if that's okay. Just
Actually, I need to add something regarding this. This and you guys should understand this. I'm sorry I didn't bring it up. But whenever you're duplicating a track and combining them, or even if I wanted to do parallel compression and send something out or send several things out to an aux and then combine them, anytime you're combining the same signal into the mix from different paths, you have to pay very, very close attention to the phase, and listen in mono, and obviously just pay close attention to the phase. I rely on my delay compensation engine in Pro Tools pretty much every minute of every day. So I'm sure that at school they're teaching you about phase and its relationship, from sound to sound, and from microphone to microphone. But those things are very important, especially with a drum kit that has many microphones on it. So anyway, that's an important issue. But go ahead, another question about compression.
Okay, so with kind of New York compression or parallel, we were just wondering how hard, I mean, I know this must be specific to each track and genre, but how hard you're actually hitting the copy with the compressor, and are you EQing that parallel compressed copy afterwards, you know? I mean, obviously these are, again, all specific to the track, but, you know, how much of that overly compressed signal do you know how to mix back in with the dry one?
That's to taste. That's to taste. And you know, one of the harder concepts for students to understand is, you know, we all know great musicians, hopefully, and one of the things about those great musicians is they're not thinking. They're not paying attention to the scales that they played, or even you know, the rehearsal of the song, and you know, they're just feeling it, and it's basically the same thing. You've got to hear it in your head. So how much of this or how little of that is always dependent on what you hear in your head. The idea, the sound that you hear in your head is what you're going for. And it takes extensive listening to actually come up with a palette of sounds in your head. You know, I find a lot of young mixers, they always want to mix. They want to spend all their time mixing. They don't want to spend their time coming up with sounds. So they'll take a job from their friend's band and you know, try and record and mix something, or just mix something. And I have to tell you, learning how to mix comes from understanding and creating a palette of sounds, in the same way that any musician, you know, has his forte of what he does. What you know, what kind of thing he does well. So I would recommend that you spend time learning how to use a compressor, and practicing different ones, and using. I remember I used to go into my practice sessions when all my colleagues, you know, my young engineers, second engineer friends, were going in and recording their bands. I would go in and just play back a tape that we had in the archive and I would go through every instrument on that tape and send it into an LA2A. And I would just spend my whole session sending every instrument into an LA2A and listening to what it did in different ways, with equalization before, with equalization after it, and logging what those sounds were in my head. I don't ever see anybody do that nowadays, and I know that my colleagues did it, the better ones, of course, because you have to have just a bank of sounds in your pocket every day. So when it comes time to come up with a sound, you're going through it. Oh, I want this guitar sound edited with this compression, with this equalization, and it's all this map. You know, it's the same thing when you're doing, you know, when you're searching for sounds, when you're programming, you know, and you've got a bank of sounds. You're going, you know, in your head which sounds you want, right? Some of them you use all the time. Well, it's the same exact thing. So I hear the sound in my head first. So how much of this or how little of that, it has to do with what the song is telling me and what I hear in my head. I know that's a long description. I'm really sorry.